in today's NFL, it's not awful. Now, I'm not saying it doesn't need to improve, and certainly, playing the Tennessees of the world and the Jacksonvilles and the Oaklands and even Tampa Bay, which, is a lot worse than we all thought they were going to be. You need to start picking it up, and that's where you need to see things level out. In other words, what I'm trying to say is, if you step back and look at some of the other teams, look at the Buccaneers against Atlanta, just shredded. That's what the NFL is today. So you're going to give up yardage and you're going to give up points, and that's what we always talk about. Is it's about winning those 50-50 games in the last 5 minutes when you're in it, and then moving on from there. And what the good teams do is they win more of those than they lose, and then they take advantage of those patsies on their schedule. So I think, as you mentioned, the next 5 or 6 weeks after this bye is where Brian Hoyer has a chance to seize control of that job. And he might not even, by the way, he might not even put up the numbers he's been able to put up in the first 3 games. But if he gets W's at the end of those games, and all of a sudden, because the next 5 games are all winnable. So, if you beat the Tennessees of the world, if you beat the Jaguars, if you beat the Raiders, if you beat the Buccaneers, and those are not good football teams. And then somehow we've constantly talked about the lack of success against Ben Roethlisberger and the Steelers. But now you have them in Cleveland. You somehow win that game and go on some kind of run, all of a sudden no one's talking about Johnny Manziel. That's the Nick Foles phenomenon we were talking about. If you play so well that nobody can enter the conversation, nobody cares in the NFL. If you're winning, nobody's going to take you out. Right. So this is a tremendously important stretch for this team as a whole, and particularly the quarterback.
And that's when I circle that X factor that is, perhaps getting a piece like Josh Gordon back. Well, it's no longer perhaps, as long as he doesn't mess up. That's not a simple as long as, but you're right. There's no guarantee he makes it until game 10. But that's kind of a looming thing where I've looked at the schedule. My honest opinion, unless this team is just going to fall off the boat and we don't see it coming here after the bye, there's no reason that this team should not be at worst 5-5, if not 6-4, when they get Josh Gordon back. And if that's the case, you've got your toughest stretch there down the run. You've got Cincinnati again. You got Baltimore. We know the teams they face, Atlanta. But I mean, even if you're sitting at 500 or at 6-4, you get Gordon back. I mean, that changes the way you attack the second half of the season. And what I'm talking about isn't one of those, well, if this happens, and it's like you said, those are all winnable games. And I'm even saying you lose 1 or 2 of those. But by week 10, this Browns team, I think just based on the schedule they face and what we've seen so far, should at least be 5-5 when they get Josh Gordon back. I mean, I don't think that's an unrealistic expectation. Do you?
No, and you're right, because I don't expect him to go off and run 5 straight, because, there's been no evidence, and until you see something like that, you can't count on something like that. I think that would be silly. But what I'm saying is the opportunity is there.
Yep, it's there.
And whether they seize advantage of it is obviously up to the club and up to Hoyer himself. But the opportunity is there where you're not, you're not facing teams that are going to be as competitive as the teams they've come up just short against. So if you play in theory at the same level, that should turn into victories instead of losses. So it's a very important stretch, but we all know how the season goes. And, you come off the bye and you're in Tennessee, for instance, that's going to be a desperate team at that time, a desperate team playing a home game. So it doesn't, you might look at the roster and say, okay, well, the Titans aren't very good, but, it's that old adage. It's not, who you play, it's when you play them. And it's a lot more difficult to play a desperate team at home.
Yeah, and that's what they're going to be. You're absolutely right. And they know, too, that, the Browns will have prepared. And I'll be interested, too. I want to see how they come out of the bye. This sets me right up for what I was going to talk to you about. We talked about the defense. And I do think what you said is underappreciated, especially when, you see some really great defenses. You'll see what Seattle does from time to time. And even they will have the off week from here and there. But
and they did in San Diego.
Right, with it being an offensive league, even great defenses, truly great ones, are going to have those games, and the statistics aren't going to be like the 85 Bears stat line was when you look across the board. It's not going to be that way, but clearly, like you said, they can shore some things up. I was listening to what Jim Leonard was saying, because he's been in this defense with Mike Pettin before, and he talked about how he thought a lot of the problem was not in the scheme. It was in that some of the guys learning it for the first year are just trying to do too much. They're not playing within the scheme. And there had been a lot of focus on Joe Hayden. We talked about Pro Football Talk and how they rate these players. And they had Hayden, I think he's 95th out of 99 cornerbacks or whatever. And there was a lot of focus on that. But I noticed some of the other Browns players.
I'm sorry.
Yeah,
let me just interrupt you for 1 second, because I have no problem with Pro Football Focus. But one of my pet peeves, and I apologize, but one of my pet peeves is everybody quotes that as law.
No.
You're not the only one. I'm not trying to pick on you. Football isn't like baseball. It's not, which is a totally analytical sport, and that's really where you saw this Moneyball kind of stuff.
Right.
It's really at its core just a batter against a hitter. So you can take these advanced statistics and really get a nice, view of the game. Football doesn't work that way. So, to me, while I respect what those guys do, when they say something like that, it proves the hiccups in their data. Because if you talk to NFL coaches and you talk to coordinators, and you tell them that Joe Hayden is, I forget what you said, 95 out of 99.
Yeah, something like that.
They will laugh at you. It's just not true. And the fact of the matter is, we always talk about football as the ultimate team game. It is. It's 11 people trying to accomplish one goal, and it's very difficult when something breaks down to just say, okay, he did the wrong thing. Sometimes he might be trying to make up for somebody else who did the wrong thing. And right. It's tremendously difficult to rate the things. That's why I still go to coaches, I still go to scouts. And even though he hasn't played well, and I'm not trying to defend Joe Hayden because he hasn't played well, but he's very good. He's a very good football player, and that to me, kind of points out some of the problems with their data.
Well, that was where I was going. I was using that as a reference point because I looked at where they had some of the other, like traditionally, Ataba Rubin's a guy that I point to that through all of the regime changes over the last few years, he's like that cockroach in a nuclear, bomb. He survived them each and every time. It speaks to what an athlete he is, and he's always been one of the top defensive players. And I noticed that, he also, based on how they, and again, I'm not using their ratings as gospel. I'm just simply using it as comparative to the way they had them rated last season. And I'm going, okay, maybe there's something to what Leonard said that, some of these guys are simply adjusting. And I'm looking at guys like Rubin, some of the guys up front. And I wonder if perhaps that's it, because I know what an athlete Ataba Rubin is. Like I said, I know he's literally changed defenses every year that he has been in the NFL. He's had a different coordinator, he's had a different head coach, and somehow he keeps surviving these things because he can ball out. But I look at how some of those guys are having little struggles, and that was, again, I was just putting it into context that I wonder how much of that is just, what you tell the media, hey, get off our back, we're working on it, and how much of that that is true, that some of these guys just have to learn to stick to the scheme, to not try to do too much.
Well, that's part of it, but and also it's a very, very small sample size. Remember that Joe Hayden has played against. Let's see, he's played against
Antonio
Ben Roethlisberger, he's played against Drew Brees, and he's played against Joe Flacco. So, when you look at these statistics at the end of the season, and now after I just, trashed them, I'm going to try to defend Pro Football Focus. If you look at it through 16 games, then all of a sudden, when he's playing Jake Locker, when he's playing Mike Glennon down the road, when he's playing Derek Carr, those numbers are going to come back to making some sense because you're not playing against Drew Brees every week. You're not playing against Ben Roethlisberger every week. And as we saw, look at Richard Sherman against Phillip Rivers. It doesn't matter who you are in today's NFL. Darrelle Revis, I think, last week had 5 targets and 5 completions against him. It doesn't matter who you are, how big your name is, when you're playing the top-tier quarterbacks, because of what the NFL has done to this game, it is very, very difficult. I would say there is absolutely no such thing as a lockdown corner in today's National Football League. It doesn't exist. It's not allowed to exist. And that's why you see something on the opening day of the year when Aaron Rodgers refused to throw at Richard Sherman. You kind of shake your head and say, what are you doing? And I blame that more on Mike McCarthy than anything, because that's how they game plan. Because you have to go at everyone. And Keenan Allen showed, hey, Richard Sherman can be beaten under these rules. Anybody can be beat. But you'll see that kind of stuff level off as I said, as Joe Hayden starts to play against some of the lesser quarterbacks in this league.
For sure. I'm one of those guys that says, hey, man, I've never used that term lockdown with Joe Hayden, but he's definitely in the top grouping. I don't know if you can be subjective and put numbers on these guys, but he's in whatever your top grouping of cornerbacks is. Joe Hayden is in that grouping. You can argue, it's like whenever people try to quantitatively compare guys, I'm like, I think it's more fair to separate them into groups, and this group is head and shoulders above this one, and and it's much easier than saying he's number 1, he's number 2, he's number 3. It's very subjective at that point. And but I wanted to bring that up mostly to the point of many of these guys. It's also that as part of it too. And then you hit on it. That what you said to start it is what's overlooked by everybody, is the fact that you're trying to, critique a defense in a league that's built for the defenses to fail. Like that is a big part of that. And the other thing is what we've mentioned and you just mentioned, the quality of the quarterbacks you faced. I mean, look at the rest of the schedule. You definitely don't have 3 in a row. Maybe at the end, I'd have to look at how the games fall at the end. But, when are you going to hit 3 in a row like that? And the same with the teams. Even Pittsburgh, now their depth is going to be tested. They've got the injuries. I don't know if we've got a good gauge of how good or bad they are. Maybe they're just another 8-8 type season for them. But that was the first game of the season. They jumped on the Browns. Second and third games, you're playing playoff and or Super Bowl caliber, at least competitive teams. I mean, that's a very interesting test of your team. And it brings me to what I wanted to ask you is a lot of people think that the bye is at a bad time for the Browns. And I understand that from a health purpose, is getting your guys healthy, giving you a break after 8 or 10 grueling weeks of the season. I take the flip side of that and think it's positive because it's almost a very tough test of very tough. Probably the toughest 3-game test of your team you could have had to start the season based on your schedule. And then you almost get a pause and a reset. I said yesterday it's kind of like opening day part 2. You almost got a real-life preseason for 3 games, except these games counted, and now you can really tweak and readjust and look at it as almost a restart on the season. Not that, you started terribly, but kind of a chance to restart the season there. So I think there's a good that goes with the bad of it being so early in the season. A lot of times if you get that bye later, all you can use it for is to get healthy because you can't make a lot of changes late in a season. Some of those wheels have fallen off, and it's already rolling downhill. Early, you really can stem some things.
Well, I mean, you're putting that's a glass is half full spin.
That's right.
I could tell you,
glass
coaches,
is half full.
coaches